song and dance going on.
It's Darren Rose Radio. Another lovely Los Angeles day here poolside in Silver Lake. Hanging out with me is a man who's pretty much done everything in the music business. Is from what it sounds like, a little bit of A&R, ran his own record label. He has been running 606 Studios in the Valley, which is the Foo Fighters studio for the last 10 years. Very DIY, a SoCal punk rocker, Scott Parker.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
I am a jack of all trades, master of none.
That's the way to be in the music business, right?
I mean, absolutely.
Yeah.
You got to be.
Let's. I usually like to start at the beginning. We were just talking before we sat down about being an OG SoCal guy, born and raised in both Pasadena and Newport.
Yep. Pasadena, Newport. Been here my whole life. Defended to the end. You know, I'm not one of those people that moved to another city and then defends the one they came from, which always annoyed me. Yeah, I stayed here. I love it. I wouldn't live anywhere else. I've traveled extensively, and every time I land at LAX, I'm like, fuck, it's good to be home.
Good to be home.
It's good to be home.
What's your first music memory?
My first music memory, I would have to say, and I don't remember how old I was, but because I didn't come from a very musical family.
Really?
Like,
okay.
You know, my family listened to what was on the radio, and that was it. I don't even remember them buying records or having records in the house.
Huh.
But for whatever reason, my dad took me and my older sister to see Chuck Berry.
Okay. That was your first live show.
Yeah, it was
Wow.
like somewhere like in Fullerton or something. But, you know, this was Fullerton in the 70s.
Yeah.
So it was like, I have no idea where the fuck we were or anything like that. So, but I remember seeing Chuck Berry was the first live show I ever saw, which is a...
Did you know his music going
starting
in?
at the beginning.
Was that something that was... Did you know the history of who this guy was?
I didn't know the history. I mean, I guess I did as much as a kid could, but I didn't know the full story. But I knew he was some old rock and roll guy, like the beginning of rock and roll.
Yeah.
You know, but now I look at the importance of it and being able to, like, say I've seen him, you know, it was great. You know, I don't remember the set. I was a kid. Yeah. You know.
Did you, what about, you said there weren't a lot of records or a lot of music around the home growing up. What was your influences? Did you have friends that were turning you on? Because you were kind of a punk rocker early on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that mid-'70s was like the heyday, obviously.
Yeah, and it was like, and I was still a little young then, but it was like neighbors. I had a neighbor that when I moved to Newport, I really got more into it. Because even my older sister, I think to this day, she was an avid reader.
Okay.
You know, and so, I mean, to this day, she's probably bought a dozen records in her life.
Really? Okay.
So I don't have that older sibling that you kind of latched onto what they were listening to and then you found your own deal. And I remember, now I don't remember his name, but I had an next door neighbor that was really into like the new wave stuff. And this was when I was in Orange County. So I was probably 12 or 13 at this point. And I don't really know how I stumbled on to punk rock. And, you know, as growing up, I liked this shit everyone else liked. Kiss, Cheap Trick, Aerosmith, all that. And then you kind of find your own deal. Mm-hmm. And I don't really know how I made that, you know, connection to the punk rock stuff. Except I do remember, and again, I don't remember how it came about, but I vividly remember my mom being in a record store with my mom, which was super rare. And she was like, yeah, do you want to get a record or something like that? Mm-hmm. And I don't know why, but I picked London Calling.
The Clash.
Yeah, The Clash. And it was a new release. You know, it was like 1980 at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think London Calling was 80.
80, okay.
And I remember her walking up to the counter and the girl at the counter looking at my mom like, why are you buying this? Mm-hmm. And then my mom kind of motioned to me, and I was just this little kid.
Yeah.
And the clerk was even more confused now, like, wow, that was the weirdest thing. But, you know, that set the course for everything. I mean, still to this day.
That was the changing point.
That band is the end-all, be-all. That is fucking ground zero for me. It will always be the watermark. They're my Beatles, for sure. And then I saw them at the Palladium when I was 15. So I'm 15 years old. They're playing at the Palladium. I go. I think it was probably one of the first shows I ever went to on my own that my parents knew about. It was the first one I got the official "You Can Go."
You can go.
And I went with some friends.
You didn't have to say you were going to a friend's house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I went to that show, and that was 82. And dude, changed my life. Changed fucking everything. I mean, it was a perfect storm. You know, great band. I was 15, super impressionable.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, and they came out, and it was just this fucking attack. And to this day, I've always gone and I've compared every other band.
That's the benchmark.
That's what it's the watermark.
Yeah.
Those guys are the fucking watermark in my life.
Yeah.
And still to this day, they can walk on water. They can do no wrong.
Did you ever get a chance to meet him?
I never met Joe, but he called me one day. I did with one of the labels.
Joe Strummer, of course.
Yeah, Joe Strummer. I did a benefit album for the West Memphis 3.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, my friend Danny Bland and I did it on our label. And we had a bunch of people on it. Steve Earle was on it. Eddie Vedder was on it.
I remember that record.
Yeah. And so we had gotten in contact. I think Danny got in contact with Joe's manager. And he was like, yeah, he wants to do it, you know, but he's kind of in a weird spot right now. He doesn't have a band. You know, you're going to kind of have to find him a band. So we ran into a friend who was managing the Long Beach Dub All-Stars at the time.
Okay. Yeah, I had Roz MG on here not long ago. Yeah.
And we asked them, would you want to do this? And their manager said, well, here's the deal. They're kind of in a position where singing isn't the best part of that band. You're going to have to kind of hook them up with somebody that you know, because they always kind of guested it.
Exactly, yeah.
And Danny and I looked at each other and went, how about this? How if we could talk Joe Strummer into doing it? And he was like, fuck yeah!
Yeah.
You know, and so we called Joe and we said, how about this? Long Beach Dub All-Stars, who he was aware of, you guys cover The Harder They Come, which that movie, Jimmy Cliff is another big,
Jimmy.
landmark in my musical life.
Well, and the reggae and the Clash and the reggae influence is hand in hand, and such a unique signature for them.
Yep. And so he was all over it. He's like, we'll do it. So they tracked here. We sent it to London. He got the drive, and I'm sitting in my house making breakfast or whatever, and the phone rang. I mean, the phone in my house, in my kitchen rings.
Yeah,
and I answer it, and this voice asks for me. I'm like, this is he. And he's like, this is Joe. And he starts to talk about this drive and the songs. And it doesn't quite click who it is yet till I'm like, oh, fuck. This is Joe Strummer. Like, my idol, musical idol from, the beginning of it is on the phone.
Yeah.
And he called me. And it wasn't a mistake. He put 10 numbers, well, actually 13 numbers together on purpose to get me. And I'm like, holy fuck. So I instantly go into cool guy mode.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, yeah, cool, man. All right, cool. And he goes, love the tracks. They're awesome. But there's 4 of them on there. I don't know which one you want me to sing to. And I said, hey, dude, I to be honest with you, I haven't even heard what's on there yet. It came straight from the studio to you. Okay. So let me call the engineer. And, he goes, all right. And I go, can you call me back in an hour? He goes, no, here's my number. Call me. And I'm like, all right, cool, man. Yeah, everything's cool. And so then I hang up the phone. And, dude, 13-year-old schoolgirl at prom. I was just like, I just got asked out to my first prom, and I was just like, holy fuck. I called my wife. I'm like, oh my God, you'll never believe what just fucking called me. She's like, slow the fuck down, dude. And so that was the only time I spoke to him. But I mean, it was like, I was like, holy fuck. Joe Strummer.
Yeah, that's
just
great.
Fucking called me.
Well, and you're one of those guys, and I'm the same way, having worked in radio and having met and interviewed and hung out with a lot of my idols growing up, and it never gets old. It never, that element of like these guys that I listened to in my bedroom when I was just a, pimply kid trying to figure shit out, that I'm now hanging out with, like, we're talking music. We're like colleagues.
Like I'm working on a project
exactly.
with him.
Yeah, it's very surreal.
Yeah, and it hadn't really sunk in that I was working on something with Joe Strummer because there was a detachment.
Yeah.
Him not actually physically being here. Until that moment, it's like, I'm making a record with fucking Joe Strummer.
Yeah.
This is rad.
So you're 15, you went and saw the Clash, and you're sold right away. One of the things that, I think most people might understand is that kind of like hip-hop, punk rock's a lifestyle. Punk rock is a mindset, an attitude, a culture, a community even. Did you jump into that right away? Did you, with the clothes and the tats and everything?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Tattoos came a little later.
Right.
15.
Didn't want to shock your mom.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Didn't want to, it was
Give her a
coming.
heart
I
attack.
had to ease them into it, but absolutely. It was the whole thing. It was the whole thing. And Southern California was such a great place to be for all that. We had some of the best bands that you could go see all the time. I mean, Circle Jerks, TSOL, Black Flag was around. X, still one of my favorites, and then even the Flesh Eaters, which is kind of an offshoot of X. And, they were all just here, and it was great. And
it's cool, too, because you, and I was still in Seattle at the time, and that had its own thing bubbling up in the 80s. But when Roz MG was on a podcast from a month or two ago, he was talking a lot about what you're mentioning, is that through the 80s, there, and even in the 70s, there was like kind of three really influential things going on in music in SoCal. You had the skater punk stuff. You had kind of that old school surf vibe, kind of that the Beach Boys, the beach culture. And like the ska thing started to bubble up too. So there was this perfect storm of all this music happening, and it evolved into what came out with like the Offspring, kind of a pop punk thing that became okay for the mainstream.
Yeah.
Did you feel like as a kid watching that happen, like your heroes and some of this stuff was selling out? Like when you saw some of these guys that were in the clubs that were all of a sudden getting radio play on K-Rock or KNAC, that what was your take on that?
No, I never thought that getting your music or your art, whatever that was.
You weren't one of those guys.
No, absolutely not. I always thought that was really not cool, because I felt like all the people that were, casting stones at those guys for taking opportunities that they earned, that they put in the time and sweat equity to get to those opportunities. Number one, would they do it? If the roles were reversed, they'd fucking do it.
But I think what a lot of the frustration was, though, with fans is that they identified with them as kind of a blue-collar worker. That, like, I'm a middle-class or lower-class kid going to these shows. They're a middle-class, maybe lower-class garage band. Now they're flying first class to around the world. So I feel like maybe it's part of that, it's Concrete Vietnam around here.
Yeah.
That's a giant...
It's L.A. We're definitely in L.A.
Giant chopper. But I think that there's that, like, all of a sudden our heroes aren't relatable anymore.
Well, my question to that is, you have to take it case by case. Because did those people change their message and change their art to obtain the jet? Or did they stay on course to what they've always preached? Clash is a perfect example. Perfect example. I think Bad Religion's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Did they change their
Green
message?
Day's that example that went from the one end of the spectrum all the way to the other Broadway end of the spectrum.
Right. But and so I always felt if the message didn't change and they stayed the course to what the original attack was, or the original where they were coming from, then it was fine. They just found a bigger audience, which I thought more power to them. It was other bands that kind of changed with the tides, and a few of them pop to mind that I was like, okay, that's bullshit.
Like who?
I thought seeing Channel 3 go from a punk band to kind of a glammy rock band. Dude, the hair and the fucking blouses and shit. Okay, that's what I'm calling bullshit. Because now there's a trend that's coming that you've changed. And, TSOL, when Joe Wood was in the band and it became a rock band, it's like, okay, I got to call bullshit on that, because the message changed.
That goes to the next thing I want to talk to you about is A&R. Let's start from the beginning. How did you get hired, and how did you...
I just did the normal thing. I started running, I interned when I was still in school at Enigma Records. Then when I got out, I started, I ran the mailroom at Island Records.
Okay, yeah.
And that's where I met Joe Sib.
Okay.
And so then I got a job in the marketing department at BMG, who distributed Island and Arista.
Okay.
And then a marketing job opened at Arista, so I jumped over there and got that job. So I was just a scout, and basically at that time, the scout was you set the table for your boss. And you just said, hey, here, you
Check this out.
you guys can eat if you want or not, and your job is to make sure they don't miss anything. So there was a combination there to make sure that they were aware of everything else, the things that everyone else was chasing.
Okay.
But then also stuff that you found on your own that people will probably start chasing. So it was kind of a duality there. You had to, chase stuff and then also know what everyone else was chasing.
So you were, what happened after Arista? You left Arista after a time? And
I left with my boss to go work at Lightstorm, which was James Cameron's label.
Okay.
And it was a co-venture with Epic.
Okay.
And it became very apparent pretty quickly that they had promised him a boutique label, and all they really wanted was the soundtracks. And basically promised him the world to get the soundtracks to his movies, which worked because they got the Titanic soundtrack. So, so they played it right. But we signed one act, this guy Beaver Nelson, who still kicks around Austin. Mm-hmm. I still think he's one of the best unknown American songwriters out there.
What's his name?
Beaver Nelson.
Beaver Nelson. Okay,
and we made a record with him at Ardent Studio in not Nashville. Where is Ardent? It'll come to me. God, why? Where's Graceland?
Memphis.
It's in Memphis.
Yeah.
And it got shelved.
Okay.
And that's when it became apparent, like, oh, they'd spend the money just to go, okay, here's a little project. I don't think they really ever had the intention of putting it out. And so with that being said, everyone kind of got that feeling that that's what it was. And so they were scaling back, and basically, there was no need for me there anymore. But in the meantime, I had started my own label, the first one called Diablo Musica, and had signed a band called Extra Fancy. And they're an LA band, and had recorded their record and put out a 7-inch from one song. And so I was kind of on my way out the door anyways. And
this was kind of the label was kind of a side hustle at that point.
Right, absolutely.
And then it became
my
full-time gig. Yeah.
And we did a deal with Atlantic that, Atlantic took the band and took the contract, took the record, and tried to relaunch it. And there were some mistakes there, which happens a lot with the relaunch. It's really hard to pull a record that's already been released and then change it to a major and, relaunch it because, retail and radio are already going, well, we've already been serviced this record. It doesn't make sense anymore. And I tried to talk everyone involved in like, no. Just put some marketing money into our record. Let's push it forward and, set up your next record. And they weren't going for it. They wanted to just give us a check and go on without us, which the band wanted to, and band's management wanted it too. So I reluctantly said, all right, if this is what the band wants, then I'll take my check and go away, which is what I did. And at the end of the day, we ended up selling more copies of that record out of my garage than Atlantic sold. I started another label with my friend Danny Bland, who was managing the Super Suckers at the time, called Aces and Eights. And that was distributed through Koch. And we did the West Memphis 3 benefit record, did a Super Suckers record, did a Zeke record, and then that was about it. And it kind of ran its course. And I started managing a couple bands and, just kind of trying to figure out the next move.
You ran one in the mid-'90s. You're kind of doing one now. Different tools, different music business. What are some of the differences? What are some of the challenges now versus then? And, a lot of guys would say, oh, I'm completely out of the label business.
Oh, I said that.
Yeah.
Oh, I absolutely said that.
So what was your decision to get back in?
My decision to get back into it was the fact that I loved making records. And not recording them. I don't have those chops. I'm not an engineer.
Producer,
I'm not that.
Yeah.
I loved helping people foresee their dream and get their art out, and so I wanted to go back to that. And then I started thinking, well, the hardest thing I always came up against having my own little label was covering, studio time, getting in a good studio and making this work. It especially back then was very cost prohibitive. That was my biggest cost in the whole thing, and so, I'm like, well, wait a minute, I kind of got that covered,
right,
where I come to work every day. And so I thought about what I wanted to do, and I say I'm kind of running a label because I am, but not in the traditional sense, where I'm starting a 7-inch series. that I'm going to release.
Nice.
Just a 7-inch series. Bands, and I want to do it with rock bands. I want to do it with bands that can play their own music. And so I've kind of set up this deal where bands have 2 days to come in and record 2 songs.
Okay.
And so it's basically play it live with, you scratch vocal, do your vocal, and maybe a guitar overdub, and we're done. It's like, don't overthink it, it's fucking rock and roll.
Yeah.
And so I've partnered up with Cobra Side Distributors, and we're basically now just scheduling people to come in 606 and record 2 songs, and we're going to put them out on vinyl. There will be a digital, element to it as well, but the thrust is going to be vinyl. Here's the deal. The artists own the masters. I'm not going to own the masters.
You're a facilitator. Basically, yeah.
I have a license, for a certain time, an exclusive license, and then all the rights go back to the band. The band owns the rights from the second they finish recording. And, so I kind of see looking at a label model now as like, I don't want to sign bands in the traditional sense. I want to do things like this. Like, you own your masters. That's your art. That's it. Let me help get it out there, and I'll take my cut. I'm not going to do it for free. But this whole ownership of other people's art, I just don't want to do it. I don't want to have bands on my roster. I want to, if there's a band that I think is great, and I can work out a way that they come in 606 and make the record, then I'll release it. If there's a band that already has a record, I'll look into releasing that as well. But they're not going to be signed in the traditional sense of, like, when I came up, like, I'm going to sign you to the contract and, I have 3 albums. It's like, no, let's just put this one out together. And then if you want to do another one, we'll do it. If you don't, that's cool too. Because, to be honest, I don't have the time to run a label in that sense anymore.
There's too much bullshit involved.
Right, and I run a studio. I have a full-time job. I have a wife. I have kids. It's like, I can't do that.
So what are you going to do for distribution?
Cobra Side is going to distribute it.
They'll distribute. Okay. Yeah. And are you going out finding these artists? Yeah. And so you're still doing a little bit of A&R, obviously, and bringing, do you have kind of a team? How do you come into new music, I guess is the question. Do people send it to you, or do you have little feelers or your own little spies out there that say, oh, hey, Scott, you got to check this band out. They're pretty remarkable.
I think I have little spies out there. You do. Because, and some of them are old friends and stuff that have connections to more established bands that will be doing it. They have that whole pipeline. And then I have younger people like Vanessa Silberman, who, 2 bands that are going to do the 7-inch series are Dead Sarah, who I met via Vanessa, and another great band from San Francisco called the Down and Outlaws.
Yeah, I know those guys.
Yeah, they're going to do it. Another one Vanessa brought me.
And I manage this band. I got to give you
so this is all right.
Kansas City. No,
I see where this is going.
Yeah, that's the entire reason you're here, Scott. This is going to turn into a pitch session. No, but my band that I manage, Kansas City Bankroll, played with Down and Outlaws, so got to meet them. Yeah, but no, I mean that sounds like a great model. The new model is going very a la carte, because bands are a small business now. So it's like, hey, if I have the equipment to produce, I just need to record somewhere. If I have the graphic design and the web down, I just need this stuff. So it's like, for someone, you hold a certain set of skills that are going to be very, and they're going to be very valuable to artists. And I think,
well, at least that's my pitch.
Well, and I think that there's a lot of artists that don't need the full gamut of a label. They don't, for monetary reasons.
Absolutely.
And for control. And then also it's just like, there's so many things that are accessible to us now.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's the beauty of technology. I think the beauty of being able to make a record, in your computer and stuff, there is an upside to it. Even though it's 606, we try to record to tape as much as possible. I mean, because we have that board and we have the machines. But, I think technology it's leveled the playing field, for people that you can, if you're creative, you can make a good record with minimal stuff. You just got to be creative and know how to using the technology as a tool, not a crutch. And then you fall on the people that use it as a crutch, and that's where it gets bad. But there's people there that use it as a tool, and it's great.
I want to talk a little about how you got involved with 606. For those that don't know, 606 Studios is where the Foo Fighters do all the recording. The film Sound City, a couple years back, that Dave Grohl put on, is about the board that's in 606. And I think that's the big core of 606 Studios is the Nev board that's in there. You want to talk a little bit about that? And you've been there for 10 years now.
I've been there. It'll be 10 years in February, which is insane.
It's probably gone by like that.
Yeah. I mean, like half of us didn't have kids. Now there's kids. Now, I mean, the whole landscape has changed over there.
Well, let's go back to the beginning. Then how did you originally come on as the studio manager?
I had managed a couple of bands after I, stopped doing my own label, and had become good friends with Adam Willard, who was the drummer in Rocket from the Crypt.
Okay.
And now he's in Against Me. Mm-hmm. But we had become good friends over the years from when he was in Rocket. And he moved up to LA. We started hanging out, and quite a bit. And he started a project with Pat Wilson from Weezer.
Oh yeah.
And they wanted to put it out, The Special Goodness, and they wanted to put it out themselves. And Adam said, "Well, my friend Scott, he's done this." And they asked me if I would help them set up their own label and get it out there, which I did. And it ran its course and ended up, same thing. Epitaph picked it up, but they cut the stream. They stopped it, pulled back all the independently released album, and then tried to resurface it. And everyone goes, "Well, we've already serviced this." It's super hard to do, and I've seen people do it. And, in 2 occasions I've been part of it. And I'm like, why do they do that? It doesn't make sense, but I digress. And so Adam and Dave were friends. Dave Grohl were friends. And I had just stopped managing. I was literally doing nothing. And Adam went over. They had gotten the studio up, built enough that they were starting to record In Your Honor. And they were talking. And
when did, quick side note, when did they purchase and build, and when was that studio up and running? What year was that?
Up and running, they started recording In Your Honor in 2004.
Okay, so it was pretty much open. They were looking for a manager. It was open and running, and they needed someone day to day.
And that's what happened.
Okay.
That's exactly what happened, because Adam went over to look at the studio, and they're hanging out, and Dave said, "Yeah, but now our problem is we've built this thing, and we don't have anyone to run it." Mm-hmm. And Adam said, "I have your guy. Call this guy." So Dave's tech called me, and I went in and hung out with him for, a couple hours, then I left. And, thought, it would be cool. I mean, it's 3 miles from my house.
Yeah.
And the next day, Joe, his tech, called me and said, "Hey, dude, I know this isn't really your deal, and blah, 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 but can you do me a huge favor? Could you run over to Gibson and just pick up these guitars for me? What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm sitting on my ass, dude."
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, dude, no problem." So I ran over and did it, and he gave me $100 cash. I'm like, "Thanks," And he's like, "What are you doing tomorrow?" And I'm like, "I don't know. Fuck, I'll come hang out, And so it literally was like that. Like, "What are you doing tomorrow?" I'm like, "Nothing." It's like
your trial run.
Yeah, dude. And it turned into this thing like, "What are you doing next week?" I can come around, And so it literally started that. And then 2 months later, because Joe was kind of running the studio, but he knew he had to go out on the road.
Yeah.
Joe had decided he didn't want anything to do with the studio anymore. He just wanted to be Dave's tech. So, and they were going out on tour, and it was like, "Here are the keys, dude. I guess it's your deal now." And
but yeah, their album Sonic Highway just came out. I think that's the fourth album they've done at 606.
It's actually, they didn't do it at 606.
Well, right. So that's part of it. They're doing the HBO series, which, they rehearsed there. They kind of put it together, and then they went and
demoed it there.
They demoed it there, because that was pretty much all of 2013. They were kind of, putting the basics together of that record. And then the premise of the HBO show is that Foos went out to, maybe 15 different studios around the world. 8 different studios around the
country. It's just national.
Just national. You know more facts than I do. You should be telling the story. But and what do you know about that? I mean, I know that the series is just starting, the album's just out. But how did that idea come about?
The idea, I think, was it kind of dovetailed out of the Sound City.
Okay.
And the idea of, Dave's whole philosophy, and it's kind of my same, I share it with him, that, and, I don't know if it's because I've been around him for 10 years or it's the reason I've been around for 10 years, that the beauty of music, any kind of music, is people playing it together. Mm-hmm. And bringing in what you bring and what the city brings and what your environment brings. And, I mean, all that should play into it. And, again, that's playing it live instead of making it in pieces and all that stuff. So, which is a big theme in Sound City. And so what Dave wanted to do was go out and record a song in each city with a significant artist from that city. And so, so they would go to Chicago. And it's a bad example because I can't remember who plays on that track. Or we'll say Seattle. And so they would go and they'd have the song pretty much worked out. And they go in there for a week. But what they would do, and Dave really wanted to soak in the city. So everything wasn't totally nailed down. He wanted to get up there and kind of feel everything. But then what he did I thought was really cool and very unique to the process. They would track during the day. And then at night, Dave would go out and interview some of like Ann and Nancy and some other people from Seattle. And he would write the lyrics to that song is the last thing. And he would go through, he'd transcribe all the interviews. And he'd pull out sayings and phrases from what the other people were telling him about Seattle. About recording in Seattle and being a Seattle musician. So he would write a song about Seattle, but using their words. And that's where all the lyrics come from, is him looking at the transcripts of all the interviews he had done during the week and put them together and make a song out of it.
I want to ask you one last question, and it's kind of might be a tricky one. What do you feel like the music industry does really well, and what do you feel like needs to improve sooner than later?
This is what I think. I think they are catering to the lowest common denominator.
Yeah,
which is a problem. But I understand you're running a company, and where the majority of your people, that's the lowest common denominator. So you have to cater to them, and but just I don't know. That is a tricky question
because what they do well is what they do bad.
Right? Yeah, they're the best at pumping shit out.
Yeah.
But then again, I don't want this to be totally bashing and like I hate everything that's out there now and blah, blah, blah. There are records that have come out on a large scale and, done really, really well and done the whole major pop, push, like the Lord record I fucking love. And every time I listen to it, and I listen to it quite often because my daughter loves it as well, I'm shocked because the message goes against what is out there, but people love it.
You're talking like her lyrics?
Yeah. It's like, I almost look at like she's, in a position like Nirvana was. That it's like this, she's gotten this message out almost under the radar, and people are listening to it on a huge scale, but they're listening to Kanye, and then they're listening to her, and she's rallying against exactly what he's saying, but it's working. Yeah. You to be an artist, whether it's visually, graphically, musically, whatever, you've chosen a hard line.
Yeah.
It's the majority of people don't make it.
Right.
But it's like I think the people that really do it, there isn't a choice. It's kind of like if you're an artist, it's kind of like being gay, and someone goes, well, why would you choose to do that? It's like, well, I didn't choose to do it.
Yeah.
This is just what I do. It's how I breathe. With music, it's hard because then you have to be the face of this one thing, but you really want to do this other thing.
Right.
And that's where it gets tricky.
And that's the artist balance. I mean, that's the artist's life, I think, that they lead.
Yeah.
Scott Parker, this was fantastic, man.
Awesome.
I love chatting, talking shop. What's next for you? Are you if you look into your crystal ball, the Scott Parker crystal ball, where do you feel like your career, if you could pull the strings and make it all happen, where would you like to set out for pasture in the music business?
I would like to go where I think it's going and move from the music business. And I kind of already am on that road, I hope, to someone that creates content.
Like Death or Glory.
Like Death or Glory.
Your web series.
And the 7 inches and stuff. It's more, I want to go in that direction. And I never did any, and the funny thing is I never did anything in film or TV or anything. There's always music. And I was thinking about this the other day. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a producer. She won an Emmy for a movie that she made. And I said, and it's not lost on me that when I left Lightstorm, because they closed down the label, they came to me and said, we're closing this down, blah, blah, blah. But if you want to stay here, we'll find a job for you. We'll find a position for you. But it's going to be making movies. It's not going to be making music. And I said, no, my passion is music. My passion isn't movies. So thank you, but I'm going to pass. And now I'm like, oh, but wait a minute. Now I'm back to making what is TV for the web. And I was like, but it's
still music based.
Yeah, but said I didn't want to do that. But I could have learned a few things along the way, and a few thousand connections that would help me now. But it's like
you got a good partner, Jared.
Absolutely. Everything happens for a reason. I believe that 100%.
Death or Glory, is that at a place where we can promote and tell folks to go see that?
It's right now. If you go to YouTube and type in Death or Glory Story, that's the channel.
Okay.
And they're all up there. And
I'll put that up on DarrenRoseRadio.com.
Yeah, and you can also get it at Jared's site at the Rockarazzi site.
Rockarazzi.com.
Yeah, they're at both places.
Well, this has been a blast, man. I'd love to have you on again just to shoot the shit, talk shop. I feel like we could go on and on.
Let me know. Why don't you see if people listen to it before you?
True. We'll check it
out. If it's like the resounding crickets, don't ask me back.
Chirp.
Well, I'll just come back and hang out.
Yeah,
that's cool.
We'll jump in the pool next time.
Yeah, we can do that.
Bring the kids, the wife, the whole nine. Scott Parker runs 606 Studios. If you could track him down and slip a few bucks in his pocket, maybe you could someday get into that studio. But thanks again, man. Appreciate you coming by.
Thank you.
All right, buddy.
Great. Awesome. Thanks.
Awesome.